They should never have left Ahades. It had been a big mistake to flee and come to Hyattia, hoping to get the support of the king. If anything, Kaytrona was regretting ever leaving and choosing to trust her mother. If only they had stayed back, then they could have pleaded their case to Devlin, begging for him to have mercy. She knew that regardless of his hard feelings towards their father, there was no way he would ever hurt her. The prince, now king of Ahades, cherished her just as much as he did Letitia, maybe the latter a bit more. But still, he cherishes her enough to keep her alive. There was no denying that she had been heartbroken about the news of her father's death and sometimes found it hard to believe. Maybe to everyone, he was nothing more than a greedy, arrogant, and tyrant king. But to her, he was a man who loved her unconditionally and was ready to do anything as long as it brought a smile to her. Kaytrona had felt like her heart had broken into 2 tiny pieces when the news of her father's death reached her ears. She wanted nothing more than to run to him, but her mother had been the one to stop her. The former queen of Ahades had seemed more terrified at the prospect of her dying and saving her own neck than worrying about the death of her husband. As much as Kaytrona wanted to think that her mother's survival instinct had been what kicked in, a part of her couldn't help but think that the woman who birthed her cared little to nothing about the death of her husband and was only worried that the little power she had been cut off. Now here they were in Hyattia, in far worse condition than they bargained for. She couldn't remember the last time she and her mother ate or had a taste of water. Hunger came and went multiple times, yet they couldn't dare take a glance at their captor. They didn't care that they were a part of the royal family. To them, they were nothing but filth. Dirt that they could easily get rid of. The men looked cold and void of any emotions, which made it futile for them to fight back or hold their ground. They were nobody in the land of Hyattia. It almost felt like an eternity since they had been caught, but it had only been a day and a half since they stepped foot into King Orin's territory. The terrifying-looking, hefty men dragged them into what seemed to be the back of the palace, away from prying eyes of the people, and up and down the stone staircase. Kaytrona swallowed down a painful cry when she had been nearly strangled by her own dress, all the while struggling to match the men's long, sweeping footsteps. Her gaze turned back to take in the appearance of her mother, who looked to be in far worse condition than she was. Her hair, which was usually tied up in an elegant and sophisticated manner, was disheveled, looking like a mess. Her pale white face, which spoke nothing but beauty, was colored with black stains, and her once glintful eyes seemed to have lost their light. Kaytrona couldn't help but fight back the tears. Never in her wildest dream had she thought a day like this would come, where they would fall from grace to grass. With a heavy heart, she returned her gaze back to her front as the guards continued to drag them. Palace servants walked past them, talking in hushed whispers, and greeted the men rather enthusiastically while disregarding their bound forms. Eventually, the noise died down. They dragged them pitifully down flights of stairs until they reached the bottom. She surmised that they must be in a cellar of some sort because the stench of dust and rot was prominent in the air. As for what was rotting in the room, she doesn't want to know. With some disparaging terms, the men dragging her deposited her limp body onto the cold cement floor. The door was slammed shut, and silence quickly ensued when they were left to themselves. "How could they treat us in such a manner?" Afra whispered as quietly as she could. Her anger and despair were barely concealed beneath her trembling breath. Kaytrona struggled with the urge to roll her eyes, wondering if her mother had failed to grasp the reality of their situation. "We are still a part of the royal family. King Orin has no right to treat us this way." Her mother continued with a bare wisp of air. A hint of annoyance was laced thickly in her voice. "In case you failed to remember, Mother, this was a man that had wished to wage a war with the Ahades only a year ago. The only reason for his holding back had been because of the Nisha king." Kaytrona stated it more harshly than she intended to, suppressing a sob with her anger. It was the wrong idea to leave Ahades for here. "Where did you suggest we should have gone?" Afra hissed. "With Devlin taking the throne, there is no telling what he would have done to us. I'm afraid your brother has lost his mind. I didn't expect King Orin to be infected with this dreadful plague of insanity. And yet here we are." Kaytrona cried sharply. "What do you suggest we do now, Mother? How exactly do we get out of here? There is no telling what horror awaits us here." Kaytrona couldn't help but think of what was to come or what the king of the Hyattia had in store for them. Despite her mother's thoughts about their new king of Ahades making sure they met the same fate as the previous king, she couldn't help but think that her brother wasn't ruthless enough to do that to them. Her eyes wandered off to her mother, and for some reason, she felt the former queen of Ahades was hiding something. Something that she was certain had to do with Devlin and her reason for fleeing the kingdom instead of begging for his mercy. "We need to think of a way out of here." Afra stuttered, sniffling here and there as she tried to calm herself. "How do you suggest we get out of here?" Kaytrona choked out hoarsely when the sound of heavy footsteps made their way in their direction. Kaytrona's eyes flashed to where she thought the door was, unable to see anything other than black. Even without her vision, she knew that they were in deep trouble.
"Shut the fucking hell up!"
a deep voice yelled. The Ahades princess' fingers curled into a fist until she could feel the painful sting of reality as hopelessness sank in. She had never felt more terrified in her life. "One more word from both of you, and I won't hesitate to slash your neck. That would definitely keep your mouth from chattering." He snarled loudly with extreme resentment and disgust, causing them to immediately shrivel into themselves. "That's enough, Walton. The king will make the final decision," one of the guards says to the other. It was certain they wouldn't kill them yet, but that doesn't mean they won't later. After all, they were no use to them, and if King Orin did give them his approval, Kaytrona was sure they would be dead faster than the blink of an eye. "Count your luck, it won't last long." Walton snarled in unconcealed fury, his footstep retreating. They were once again enveloped in silence for the next few hours since their last conversation basically almost led them to their deaths. Other than the knowledge of them all dying soon. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps making their way to them rather loudly had their attention shifting towards it. And the door keeping them captive slammed open again with an extremely sickening boom of the iron gate hitting the back wall. Panic begins to fill the Ahades princess at the thought of their impending doom.
"Get up! Now!"
the guard ordered, and the princess clumsily tried to stand to her feet but found that she couldn't. Her legs were numb from sitting for so long on the cold cement, and she was stiff from fear of what could happen. Before she could attempt to stand again, big hands grabbed her by the collar of her dress, yanking her to her feet before dragging her along.
"Where are you taking us?"
Afra shouted in anger, and she wanted to shout at the woman in front of her, to ask if she was deranged or simply ignoring the warning that had been given to them.
"Shut up, bitch!"
Walton threatened. The harsh crack of a slap across human flesh made all the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. Kaytrona's felt her legs quaver, almost giving way. And the pain was terribly hard to deal with. Pushing through everything, she clumsily and blindly followed the person who was dragging her in hopes of staying alive longer. In her attempt to move faster, her left leg missed a stair step, causing her to stumble forward. The guard yanked her back up before her face could hit the cold, stone floor. All of the men were grumbling in annoyance, obviously angry that they were slowing them down, like they were at fault. After a handful of minutes, they reached the top of the stairs and continued to walk until they were stopped. Almost immediately, chills went down both Kaytrona and Afra's spines, and all the hairs on their bodies stood on end. They were shoved to the ground by a guard behind them. The sudden force left the princess slamming her shoulder painfully onto the floor when she fell forward, without the use of her arms to catch herself. Her jaw ground against the stone flooring, causing her to grit her teeth hard at the pain that inflicted half of her face. Tears threatened to spill, but she swallowed them down with a choked grunt. Fury built in her chest, heated and bitter. She bit down hard on her tongue to keep herself from lashing out in rage. She couldn't bear to do anything stupid, knowing the possible repercussions of her action. There was no need to put on a brave facade, she was scared witless. As much as she wished she had the strength to fight, she valued her life more and realized how useless it would be for her. Tears of frustration wet her cheeks and the blindfold when the foot on her neck finally disappeared, leaving a painful sting lingering behind. "What do you suggest we do to them, Your Majesty?" "Do to them as you see fit. Why don't you have some fun?" King Orin's voice resounding through her ears. "But not too much fun, we still need them alive. I'm certain they would come in handy." The sound of a feminine voice says it all, and Kaytrona could have sworn she knew that voice. It was very familiar, yet she couldn't pinpoint where she had heard it from. Not that it mattered now, the woman was the least of her worries. The fact that King Orin had given the go-ahead to his men to do as they saw fit made her cower in fear.
Yes, Your Majesty,
Walton said, with a dark chuckle bubbling from his throat. She cowered closer to the ground, wishing there was someone to save them from this terribly cruel nightmare, but she knew that was all just wishful thinking. They were all alone here, in the arms of the enemy. The Ahade's princess legs were no longer capable of holding her up upon hearing the Hyatia's king's words. She felt like breaking down and wailing her heart out, but she knew it was all futile and useless. She was certain her mother felt the same way, despite how hard she might be trying to put on a brave front. Tears dripped down her face in pools when they were met with silence, before she was soon yanked up and thrown into a hard shoulder. This made her tremble in fear, with an inkling ideal of whoever had her had in mind. No, no, no. She cried out, her voice coming out hoarsely. She couldn't lose her virtue, not like this. This was one thing she held proudly onto, and though she might have planned on seducing the Nisha king at one point, she had only done so at her father's words. There was no way she could have thought of giving herself to him when he belonged to someone else. Maybe this was why they were all going through this, maybe it was because of everything they had done to Letitia. Maybe this is karma coming back to get them in a much more devastating and mortifying way. To leave them broken beyond repair. We've made a bountiful harvest this year, one like never before. And the people are joyful, all in the mood of celebration, saying the birth of the prince and princess had been the reason for such a harvest. One of the council of men said it with a prideful voice, as the rest of his peers all nodded in agreement. And as Her Majesty requested, a healer was tasked to visit each household, checking up on the people's health. We also had some food delivered to the widows, and some to the children's home. All had been nothing but steady, another of the council of men inputted. I'm glad. You all have done so well. I gave them a smile, knowing how helpful they had been through this ordeal. I guess that is all for the day, why don't? The clearing of throat had me cutting my words, and Gale, who happens to be a part of the court and also an elder amongst them, glanced at me with an apprehensive look. I didn't mean to be impertinent by cutting Her Majesty off, but I believe there seems to be a pressing matter we need to discuss. My brows furrowed, wondering what he meant since we spent hours going through the affairs of the kingdom. What else could be more important that we so mindedly skip?
What seems to be the problem, Gale?
He sighed, his eyes wandered around the room, and a look of hesitation crossed his face before he finally spoke. It's been 2 months since the birth of the prince and princess, and 2 months since such tragedy befell the king. He began. With the people gullible to what has happened to their king, I believe they have become more restless and suspicious. In what way? I asked, puzzled. We have been careful these past few months, so what exactly would their suspicion be based on? There have been people sending an appeal, seeking an audience with the king. Usually, it takes a week for a reply to be sent, but with the king's inaccessibility, we had no option but to let them know that His Majesty is too busy to attend to them at this very moment. He takes a deep breath. But some have taken it upon themselves to wait at the palace gate till His Majesty attends to them. At this rate, I'm afraid things might get worse. What does Her Majesty suggest we do? I heaved out a sign, trying to put on a bold front despite the sadness sipping in. It's been 2 months since Darium returned from Ahades, 2 months since he has been lying unconscious on the bed of our chamber, and 2 months since I saw those beautiful eyes of his. I've tried keeping the negative thoughts to myself, but sometimes they slip in, and I begin to worry if he is truly ever going to wake up or not. The healers attending to him all said he was better and that his wounds had fully healed, but they weren't certain why the king hadn't woken up yet. They come in day after day to check in on him, and nothing seems to change. Snapping out of my thoughts, I turned my attention back to Gale, wearing a passive look on my face. I think for now, we have someone take in their complaints, probably someone from the council. We can get someone to write down whatever issue they have on a record book, and we can try to solve them with the best of our ability. You know that won't solve anything? Gale questioned. Maybe, but it would keep things quiet, at least for now. Very well. Your Majesty, he stated. I suggest we hold a ceremonial rite to celebrate this year's reaping. We know how great it has been, the people deserve a feast. I nod my head in agreement. Then you won't mind being in charge of it. It will be an honor. Gale responded, bowing his head. I guess that's all for the day, we have been here for quite some time. Why don't you all go home, freshen up, and spend some time with your family? I believe it's time for the prince and princess to be fed, I said with a smile, rising to my feet as I made my way out of the throne room. I made my way towards the twins' sleeping chamber, though they hardly slept there since I preferred them laying beside me. They were being attended to by their nursemaid during my busy time, but I made sure to make time for them, as I wanted to be there in every step of their lives. When I walked into the room, Kiara, their nursemaid, was trying to get the little prince to stop crying but seemed to be failing miserably in calming him down. A smile slowly began to make its way to my face as I worked into the room, taking him out of her hold, and I saw the look of relief on her face. "Your Majesty." She beams, and I tried not to laugh when I saw how hard she tried to conceal the look of happiness in her face. "Why don't you take a bit of rest? I will be with them for a while," I say to her, and she bows, making her way out of the room. I turned my attention back to my son, who seemed to have stopped crying, before shifting it to my daughter, who was lying quietly in her crib, fascinated by the music bell toy on it. After the birth of the twins, I had asked the royal artisan to make a crib for them, and with the help of Neith, I was able to pick out a color scheme for their room. I glanced down at my son, who was staring at me with a look of curiosity. His blue eyes, which mirrored mine, glanced at me with interest and recognition. His beautiful, deep dimples emerged from his rosy cheeks when he smiled. "Aren't you such a naughty boy, stressing your nursemaid?" I cooed, making his smile stretch even more, which warmed my heart. Making my way to my daughter's crib, I took a seat on the couch beside her. My fingers caressed her soft, rosy cheeks, causing her attention to shift from the music bell to me, and just like her brother did, her lips stretched in an adorable smile, her blue and amber eyes reminding me of those of her father. Right now, they are a source of joy to me, and they help take my mind off everything that is waning in my thoughts. Their faces were more than enough to brighten my day, they were my source of sunshine. My attention shifted from them when the door to their nursery opened, and Neith walked in with a huge grin on her face. "How are my favorite niece and nephew doing?" she beams, walking over to the crib to pick up the princess. "I'm very certain they are your only nieces and nephews," I stated, getting an eye roll from her. "They are still my favorite niece and nephew. Aren't you, love, aren't you?" she cooed, making the baby in her arms gurgle. I watched them with eyes full of warmth, taking in how great she was with the princess. In all honesty, I wasn't sure what I would have done without Neith by my side. She truly meant it when she said she was going to be with me every step of the way, because for the past 2 months she has been nothing but supportive. She and Nico had been a great deal of help. After his recovery, the latter had come up to me to check in on the twins, and that was exactly the first time I had ever seen him cry. He had gone down on his knees, asking to be forgiven as he blamed himself for what happened to Darium. He had explained that he had been so out of it, and if Darium hadn't been distracted from saving him then, he wouldn't have been met with such misfortune. I didn't know that he had been beating himself up and blaming himself for what had happened, and when he finally told me, I immediately let him know that what had happened was not his fault. Something like this tends to happen when in war, and he had no reason to ask for forgiveness. And though it might seem like he understood what I meant, he had put in more effort in keeping the kingdom secured, working himself twice as hard, going through the security daily log of who made it in and out of the kingdom and palace. He made sure to investigate anything that was reported as suspicious, even little things that were deemed irrelevant. Nico had stated he had already let Darium down, and he didn't plan on doing so the second time, so he was doing everything he could to make sure I and everyone else in the kingdom were safe. Neitha's voice had me snapping out of my thoughts once again, and I turned to glance at her with a confused look, having no clue what she said. "Your mind seemed to be far away." She stated this with a worried look. "It's nothing," I replied, dismissing her words. "You were saying?" I asked, not wanting to dwell on my thoughts. Neitha's eyes settled on my face for a while, trying so hard to read through it, but I made sure to keep a passive face, which caused her to sigh in defeat before letting it go. How long do we plan on calling the prince and princess, boy and girl? I know very well how you wish to wait till my brother is awake, but it's been 2 months, and I believe they deserve to be named. Uneasiness settled in me, and my heart ached at her question. I know it was wrong to leave the twins nameless, but I couldn't bring myself to name them without Darium beside me. When the king wakes up, I wish for us to both come up with a name together. Neith lets out another frustrating breath. We don't know when that is going to happen or if it will ever happen.
Neithotep!
I gasped, her words sending terrors down my spine. I didn't want to think of the thought of Darium not waking up, and her stating it didn't sit well with me. The healers said his wounds are fully healed and he is most likely back to health. He just needs a bit more time to reciprocate, and I'm certain he will wake up. I love my brother and hope for nothing more that he does wake up, but it's been 2 months, Letitia. 2 months, yet there is no sign of him waking. I don't want to sound negative or demean your hope and strength. And in all honesty, saying this hurts me, but we need to prepare for the worst. What if he doesn't wake up? Will you let your children remain nameless? The boy is the next heir in line, he needs to be named Letitia. I croaked out, fighting back the tears. I knew she was mostly likely right, I needed to name them. I couldn't carry on calling them boy and girl, or prince and princess. I knew all this, yet a part of me felt like naming them without Darium didn't feel right. He had missed their birth, the one thing he had looked forward to, and their first smile. I didn't want him to miss out on naming them as well. Maybe it might sound mindless to the people in the palace, but this was something that was supposed to be special between the two of us, and it didn't feel right doing it alone. I'm not saying this to make you feel bad, just think about it. Neith says, giving me a smile, to which I respond with a weak smile of mine. I glanced down at my son in my arms, who was already fast asleep, his head resting on my chest. I turned to look at my daughter in Neith's hold and found her also fast asleep. The sun was already setting, and it was getting dark soon. Rising to my feet, I slowly laid my son in his crib, with Neith doing the same with my daughter. I knew I only had up to 3 to 4 hours to freshen up, have dinner, and spend the remainder with Darium before they woke up again. Placing a soft kiss on both their cheeks, I made my way out of their nursery, with Neith trailing behind me, her words running through my mind. Today marks the 3rd month since Darium fell unconscious. I made my occasional visit around the town, visiting some houses to check in on them and see how things were. And though some asked about the whereabouts of the king, we carried on with the same excuse that he was busy, with him sending his regrets. I tried my possible best not to let the pain and worry show when around the people, putting on a fake smile while trying to carry on with my duties as their queen. Up until today, skilled healers around the kingdom have all gathered around, trying to find reasons for the king's lack of consciousness, with all coming up with a futile reason as to why he hadn't woken up, despite being healthy enough to. Imagine the disappointment I felt when their presence lifted up my hope, and I'm left once again devastated at their statement in return because they couldn't do anything. Slowly, the hope lighting up in me of him ever waking up began to diminish. Was this how the king of the Nisha was going to live his life, unconscious, leaving us no clue when he was going to wake up, or if at all he was ever going to wake up? Tears blurred my vision as I quickly wiped away the damn tears that lingered. I don't want the people in the palace to know that their queen is weak. I can't show them any ounce of emotion that I was affected, otherwise, it will waver their faith in me to reign over the kingdom. Balling my hands into fists, I took in a deep breath as I leaned against the wall of the palace, my eyes scanning across the peaceful palace as the servants carried about their usual routine. I wish Darium was here with me right now, watching this beautiful sight with me. I wish I could beckon into his hold at this moment, entwining my hands with his calloused fingers. I sighed, pushing away from the wall as I carried on making my way up the stairs and towards the direction of my chamber with Gareth, who seemed to follow behind me without saying a word, knowing fully well how I needed some time to myself, sometimes away from prying eyes. My footsteps echoed through the floor of my hallway, making my way into the guest chamber, which I have been sleeping in since the ordeal. Kiva stood at the entrance of the bathing room, a warm, welcoming smile on her face. "Milady, I see you are back from your evening work." "Yes, Kiva," I answered, walking fully into the room. And she made her way towards me, helping me out of my nightdress. I hope it was peaceful enough for you, milady. She says, more to herself, that there is a hint of worry in her voice. I could tell how stressful it has been for you these past 3 months. She mutters, but I don't bother responding to her, and I make my way to the bathing chamber with her trailing behind me. I went into the room, getting into the bathing tub, which was filled with heated water, to help keep the cold at bay. Why don't I get some more scented rose? Kiva says. Her face has small beads of sweat due to the heat of the room and the steam from the tub. It's not necessary, this is more than enough, I stated, taking a handful of red-scented flowers and breathing in the amazing scent as they helped calm me down. Kiva nods, making her way to the wooden-designed cabinet, taking out a clean robe before carrying it, along with choosing an oil for my hair. I turned my attention from her to the large, open section of the wall right across from me. The wall led to a small balcony that overlooked a better part of the kingdom. To put it mildly, it was gorgeous, and I was always in awe of it. It seemed that there was never a dull moment in the town below. Few people could ever imagine having such a vista, but it was so bittersweet. My less-than-perfect circumstances ruined the thrill. The night air was chilly, and goosebumps raised on the exposed flesh of my shoulders and neck. I rested my hands on the tub, placing my head on it, as I stared into the chilly night sky. My attention shifted away from the nightly view to Kiva when I felt her presence behind me. She sat back on her stool and started to pour a small amount of the liquid into my hair. The rosy scent wafted into my nose. It was relaxing. I let Kiva run her delicate fingers through my thick, curly locks. She hummed as she worked the knots and grime from my snowy white hair. Milady, are you sure you do not wish to make an appearance at the celebration? Kiva asked. I'm most certain the people would be elected in your presence. The ceremonial feast for this year's harvest was being held tonight. Gale, who had been in charge of planning it, had done an excellent job of making sure everything went perfectly. I had already given the speech in place of Darium, sending my gratitude for their time and effort and also wishing for them to enjoy themselves tonight. Since Gale had been in charge of planning it all, I decided to let him handle the rest along with some of the Council of Men. Neith and Nico were also going in place of the royal family, asking for me to take a rest since I seemed to be having a hard time doing that. Not that I didn't want to, but no matter how hard I tried to take a rest, I only ended up being plagued by nightmares that left me panting and terrified. Other times I find it hard to sleep and would lay there on the bed, staring into nothingness as my thoughts wandered. That was why anytime I was plagued by night terrors or uneasiness, I preferred spending the rest of the night watching the twins or the king. I sighed as Kiva lightly tapped my shoulders. I let myself sink deep into the tub, the soap from my hair washing away in the rose-scented water. I quickly emerged, wiping the water from my eyes. The cool air hit me once again, causing more bumps to appear on my skin. Are you done with your bath, milady? Kiva asked. I nodded and waited until Kiva held out the robe to exit the tub. I smiled at her as she helped me back to the bedchamber, helping me into a set of clean nightwear before putting on a robe around me, and we set out of the room, towards the chamber in which the king laid. The twins were already fast asleep with their nursemaid, watching after them till I was ready to retire. I walked into the room with Kiva still behind me before making my way over to the bed, taking my seat on the empty side of the bed next to him, my hand holding onto his callous fingers. Esmio, you won't believe how big the twins have gotten the past few weeks. When I gave birth to them, they were only the size of a pumpkin, and now they have grown so much that they recognized the sound of my voice. The healer attending to them seemed bewildered, saying she had never seen a baby as healthy as the twins, despite being born months before their due date. You should see how flared up the town is. Beautiful lanterns are being hung around the city as the people celebrate the harvest. The Council of Men couldn't be more proud of this year's result. You should have seen Neetha's face when she heard about it. She was grinning from ear to ear, beaming with joy. I laughed, rambling on and on, talking to no one in particular. Yet a part of me hoped that he was listening to me right now. Luca had said that it would be great if we interacted with him every day, as there's a high chance of him listening, despite his being unconscious. So I held on to that little hope with me for the past 3 months, telling myself that he is listening right now. I heaved out a sigh. My gaze fell on our interlocked hands as I softly caressed his. My finger was fiddling with his. I leaned in a little, pecking his forehead, when his fingers twitched against mine, causing me to gasp out. I turned to look at him with wide eyes, my face stained with tears. My other hand lifted up to cup his cheek. Darium, is mio, my love. It's me, Letitia. Your little bird. If you can hear me, clench onto my hand. I said softly, and when I felt me do so, another gasp left my lips, my head shifting towards Kiva, who was standing by the door.
Did you see that, Kiva? His hand moved?
I said, a glimmer of hope filling me up. Get Luca, I think he might be waking up. Kiva remained rooted in her spot, with a worried look on her face as she glanced at me. Didn't you hear what I just said, Kiva? I questioned, louder than I intended to. I'm not disputing Her Majesty's claim, but this isn't the first time Her Majesty has made such a claim. Just 2 weeks ago, you were certain you heard the king voice out your name, requesting the presence of the healer. A week before that, you said the king moved a toe, once again commanding the presence of the healer, and despite it being the early hours of the morning, he still came. I know how much Her Majesty wishes for the king to regain consciousness, but this happens to be the only time the healer, Luca, gets to spend with his family. Since His Majesty fell into this state, he has been here through the morning and evening. I'm surprised he hasn't made this place his home yet, seeing how he has hardly been in his. Milady also wishes to take that chance from him, having not forgotten that his wife only bore their first child a couple of months ago. She said all this in one breath, and I felt the guilt build in me. Had I been that inconsiderate, putting my feelings before theirs? I guess I had been so blinded by the thought of Darium waking up that I hadn't thought about the strain I was putting on Luca. With a heavy heart, I let go of the king. My fingers brushed through the strand of hair on his face before I leaned back down to peck his cheek. I think I'm going to retire for the night, I said, getting to my feet. Milady, Kiva called out, remorse lingering in her voice. I didn't bother responding to her and instead made my way out of the room, towards the twins' nursery. They were still fast asleep, even when I leaned a little to pick up my daughter from the bed while their nursemaid picked up my son, and we both made our way to my chamber. The twins were gently laid on my bed, and I dismissed both Kiva and Kiera, climbing in on my side of the bed. I hummed softly, adjusting the quilt on their body as I patted it softly, not realizing when I fell. But like always, I gasped back awake with a tear-stained face, waking up from yet another nightmare. I was lying on my back with my face to the ceiling as I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. My fingers trailed towards the other side of the bed where the twins lay, and I was instantly filled with panic when I couldn't feel them. My head shoots to my side, with my body jolting up as fear grips my heart. Both twins were missing from the bed, and as my eyes trailed toward the window, they stopped at a tall, muscular man who stood in front of it. I could only make out the back of the figure, watching as they slowly turned towards me. I was able to spot the twins on their hold, still fast asleep, and my eyes slowly left the twins, trailing up until they settled on the very familiar eyes I longed so hard to see.
Darium,